Ladies and gentlemen, it's my very pleasure to welcome you to the third event of our series, Beyond COVID-19, Population Challenges Ahead. Let me particularly welcome our two eminent panelists, Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak and Rolf Schmachtenberg. Dr. Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak is professor at the Warsaw School of Economics and director of the Institute of Statistics and Demography. Dr. Rolf Schmachtenberg is the permanent state secretary at the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. We are very delighted to have you with us today. Thanks a lot for joining us. Furthermore, we are happy that a group of eminent experts have agreed to join the discussion with us today, and I will introduce them to you in a minute. We are very grateful that you will contribute to this event with your outstanding experience. My name is Andreas Edel. I'm the Executive Secretary of Population Europe, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator today. Population Europe is a network of 36 leading research institutes all over Europe with a focus on policy-relevant population developments and policy dialogue. Let me also cordially welcome you on behalf of our cooperation partner, the Council of the Baltic Sea States. The Council of the Baltic Sea States is an intergovernmental political forum for regional cooperation and consists of 11 member states and the European Union. It supports a regional perspective on global challenges. The topics we are going to discuss today are highly relevant for the future of our societies. Let me briefly raise just a few aspects. This week, there has been a discussion in the German policy arena about raising the age of retirement, given the age structure of our population. This is, of course, not a brand new discussion, but it keeps coming back as the remaining birth cohorts of the baby boomer generation are reaching retirement age. The question of the financial sustainability of our pension systems is to a large extent still an open question. We need to think more thoroughly about the career path of people in the context of unstable labor markets, where more and more people won't have only one lifetime job. There's also the question of what happens in the years before and after they enter the labor market. Another concern is what happens in the years before and after retirement. As it's often argued that in an aging society, we should activate every potential workforce, including particularly older workers. It is clear that this discussion needs a life course perspective. We have to make sure that people reach their late life career fit and well prepared for the later stage of life. This includes, for example, providing opportunities for lifelong learning, including within their working environments. However, we also have to take into consideration that there are many vulnerable individuals in our population who won't have the opportunity to make it successfully to retirement age, maybe due to prolonged unemployment, long periods of illness, chronic disease, or other impairments. Of course, these topics are relevant not only for Germany, but for all European countries that face a rapidly aging population. The Green Paper on Aging of the European Commission, which was published in January, gives very substantial guidelines in that regard. On a more regional scale, the Council of the Baltic Sea States is highly active in the sphere of labor and employment policies. For example, the Council has adopted the Vilnius II Declaration, a vision for the Baltic Sea region by 2030, and an action plan for the period 2021 to 2025, both of which are highly relevant in this regard. As you can see, we have many exciting and forward-looking topics to discuss today. We are very delighted that we were able to bring together a highly eminent group of panelists and experts today. With a link to this meeting, you should have received the bio sketches of our guests. Please allow me to shortly introduce them here in alphabetical order. Hervé Boulhol works for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, where he's the head of pensions and population aging. Marc Bovenschulte directs the Department of Demography, Clusters and Foresights at VDE IT. Jane Fockenham is Professor of Demography and International Social Policy at the University of Southampton, where she's also the director of the ESRC Center for Population Change. Alexia Fürngrans-Briskowitz is Professor of Mathematical Economics at the Vienna University of Technology and Deputy Director at the Vienna Institute of Demography. Tatiana Razumova is Professor and Head of the Chair of Labor and Personal Economics at Lomonosov Moscow State University. Last but not least, Lea Vatan. She works at the European Commission's Secretariat General as a senior expert in the unit Cohesion, Economic and Social Affairs. Thanks again to all of you for being with us today. We are very much looking forward to an exciting debate. We will first start with a round of questions for the panel with Professor Chłoń-Domińczak and State Secretary Schmachtenberg. Then I would like to invite the eminent experts to join the discussion. In the third round, I would then invite the audience, to join us with your questions. So let me come to my first question. When talking about the challenges of demographic change, social scientists strongly advocate for adopting a life course perspective, as disadvantages, for example, with regard to educational attainments and labor market participation, often accumulate over the life course. Lifelong learning has become a leitmotif in the debate about aging societies for quite a while. How can our education systems be adapted accordingly so that people remain fit for the labor market during their entire life course? Education system meant here in a broad sense, of course, including, for example, also vocational training and continuing education at the workplace. Perhaps I can start with Agnieszka Chłoń-Domińczak. Would you like to answer to this first question?
Yes, thank you very much. It is a very important question and a very important issue. I think we have a long-standing discussion on how to shape the education systems in Europe with the development of the European qualifications frameworks, which also underline that it is very important in the education system to focus first on outcomes, not on the process. So we should really understand how to define learning outcomes, how to deliver learning outcomes. Second, it focuses not only on knowledge, but on the knowledge, skills, and competences, including social competences, including the competences which are particularly important during the working lives, like ability to work in group, ability to pursue lifelong learning, to define learning goals by ourselves at different stages of life, and be aware of the need to develop new skills as our skills that we acquire during the times during at school or at the university, they really fade out, or they need to be modernized given the new technologies, new requirements that are all around us. So I think it is important that education systems indeed focus on outcomes, focus not only on knowledge, but also skills. Given the wealth of information that we have around, the role of a teacher becomes more of a guide who can help to identify what is relevant information, what is valuable information, and what is not that valuable, how to focus to find particular solutions, how to focus to find adequate responses to the questions that we have, how to learn from various things that are available throughout the internet, even on our telephones. So I think that requires changes of education system, that requires changes of teachers' approaches to teaching that really can meet these modern challenges. So I think it is very important that education system provides this very sound foundation for future learning for individuals, that we have education systems that comprise not only initial education, but also lifelong learning, adult education, that really form those skills of being able to develop ourselves throughout the working lives, to have access to various forms of learning. And indeed, adult education, including cooperation with employers, including various forms of state support, but particularly to those most vulnerable with the lowest skills, is, I believe, something that supports this life course perspective in education systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. State Secretary, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and the organization of this meeting. Actually, if you think about it, someone who's going to pension in this month with, let's say, 65 and has worked for 50 years when he started with 15. So that had been around 1970. So let us together think about the changes in life and working conditions over this period, 50 years. I think there were even not really personal computers, mobiles, I don't know, a lot of change. So it's evident, this is now the standard approach. We expect people to work for more or less about 50 years. You mentioned this debate about pension age. In Germany, it will be soon 67, which is a very high level for European standard. And so if you start with your vocational training with 17, it's 50 years. And so it's clear that we could need very good education and qualification system, but which has to be open for change. And that is actually a trap in the German system. We are very much profession oriented. Very often people have learned one first profession to which they try then to stick, because this first profession is their identity. I'm a carpenter. So I want to work as a carpenter. Actually, carpenter is not bad. I think they have a good perspective. But there are other professions where you might have to change. And so it's evident we need a strategy and support for long life learning, and in particular in those countries which cannot rely on natural resources like Russia, Australia, or United States. So for the European countries, it's even much more important to have a very qualified workforce to be competitive and productive. And to improve this, we have worked in this phase at a government level on a national skills strategy, which was adopted in 2019 to increase the commitment to continuing education and training and establish a new culture. My minister is now even talking about the Weiterbildungsrepublik, the Republic of Qualification. And this is a good way to emphasize this. And we did another very important step. We changed the law related to our labor and employment agency. Now, since 2019, they are also by law allowed to support companies in qualification schemes. That was always a thing we were very much hesitating, because in the German concept, qualification of workers is a task of the employer and not of the government or of the community of people paying contributions to the labor agency. But this we have changed, and there were even 2 laws to implement this, actually to now support companies in this change also, which has to do with climate change. So we will have a big change in the industry, in the production, and people need new qualifications. And to support this transformation, we have made these laws, and it starts to work. And the next, and this is my last point, the next field of activity is now to think about more intelligent combinations of state subsidized training periods and options of partial training periods for employed workers, and to make this possible, to combine work and training and to support it. Austria has quite well example already. We're also very impressed by the French account, the qualification. They're quite interesting approaches. There's also a debate on EU level, and we are exploring this. So I'm quite sure that this will be the next step of development to support this huge task.
Yes, thank you so much. Vulnerability has become a strong buzzword during the time of the pandemic. This includes, for example, those with long-term or chronic health issues, mental disorders, early disabilities, but also ad hoc issues, for example, after accidents or burnouts, something like that. You already touched a little bit on that. How can we better support vulnerable population groups who have in periods of their life fewer opportunities than others to care for their retirement? Can, for instance, minimum income systems help filling these gaps? What is your opinion? Perhaps we start with State Secretary Schmachtenberg.
Minimum income schemes, it's always a big term. Which kind of minimum income schemes are you referring to? Those conditionalists or conditionalists?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's no conditionalist minimum scheme because they are all related to your nationality. Mm-hmm. I don't know any proposal of a so-called conditionalist minimum income, which is really conditionalist. It's actually bizarre. They're always based on the condition that you are part of a group, a nation or whatever. And then this is a very strong condition because then if you have other people coming to the country, they don't have any minimum income. Within the European Union, you cannot do this. It's a really bizarre discussion which is going on there because it's working with concepts which are obviously, I needed only a few seconds, contradictory. And so when I'm talking about minimum income, I'm doing this in the context of the discussion of the European Union, where during the German presidency, we had a very intense debate within the member states for some recommendation, which went then to Parliament and Commission for an initiative to have a common understanding of minimum income schemes in Europe. And actually here, clearly it's not about conditionalist minimum income because all member states agreed that this minimum income has to be adequate, has to reach everybody who needs it, and has to be inclusive. This is a very interesting point. It has to be organized in a way that it supports people to live within the society, to support them, to integrate them, to give them perspectives. That's a link. So it's always linked with this. This, I think, was a very good process to understand this. And I think it's very important to organize a convergence of income within the European Union to such a process. So we have two processes. One concerns minimum wages, which hopefully are generating an income which is above the level of a minimum income. And you have minimum income for those who might be not able to have at least an income with a reasonable minimum wage, like vulnerable groups, like people with a disability, elderly. So there you need some support, and it's very important always to integrate these systems actually in the health system. Also something which people who discuss the conditionless minimum income, I follow this discussion quite closely, forget. They think only about this monthly money you get, conditionless. Hopefully you will never get sick. Good journey with them, good journey. So this, and I think during the crisis, it was very helpful that in Europe we have this kind of systems. If you look to India, if you look to South America, it was not possible for these countries to have a policy of distancing because you have a huge sector of informal work where people have to go to work because they have a daily income based on their informal work. while in Europe, part-time work schemes plus minimum income schemes, which are still of a quite different level in the European Union. There's a huge difference, but still they're helped enormously. And so this shows also that this kind of social welfare state is very, very important to handle any kind of crisis.
Agnieszka, would you directly answer to that question to the State Secretary?
Well, let me start from a little promotion of our share research of people 50 plus, as I strongly believe, and I think our discussion also shows that this cooperation between the researchers and policymaker and and the consequences of the pandemic and beyond is absolutely crucial. So just to quote a few results from a few outcomes of the telephone survey that we conducted among the Europeans aged 50 or over. First, we saw that indeed the welfare systems protect people from economic difficulties. So people who had access to benefits such as pensions survived the corona crisis, let's say, pretty well. Amongst those that still worked, around a fifth lost a job, and 22% faced an income loss that was more than 10%. And on average, amongst this group that was most severely hit, the income loss was on average around 33%. People also worked fewer hours and received short-term employment aid. So that was around also a quarter of the working population 50 and over. So that indeed shows that particularly difficult economic circumstances like those that developed in response to the pandemic and the lockdown policies can indeed affect the economic situation of people, not only those 50 plus, but through the entire life course. And welfare systems that are efficient can really protect against poverty, especially those that are most vulnerable. And I believe that it is extremely important that such a role of the welfare systems is maintained. That also means that with the population aging, with change of the population structures, it is absolutely crucial to think how to keep the pension system sustainable. So raising pensionable ages that were mentioned that are in the green paper of the European Commission is one of the important ways. And this is also linked to the issue of how to support people in the life course, and again, life course policies also from the perspective of social investment. It is very important to think about interventions relatively early to reduce the risk of vulnerable life course, let's say, through education systems, again, through inclusion policies, through the policies that help people to have gainful employment, but also those that are at larger health risk to have relatively quick access to health policies that help such people maintain their healthy working lives and healthy lives in general. So I would say, in general, the welfare systems should be focused on providing means and tools so that we reduce the risk of vulnerability, social exclusion, and the lower income. So it's not only the minimum income schemes themselves, but the overall system that first and foremost helps people to remain active as long as they potentially can, and provide tools to be reintegrated with the labor markets if it is possible, provide tools to maintain health and good health status as long as they can, and provide, of course, proper welfare support, especially to those most vulnerable. So I think we should see that in larger terms. And I agree that it is very important to define what we mean by the minimum income systems, but we should also see the minimum income system as one of the elements of the welfare policy, which is much broader.
Yeah, perhaps we can look on special groups also within this very broad range of vulnerable people. One group is people who have faced long periods of unemployment and suffered from broken working histories over their life course. What are the social political consequences of such life course events, particularly because of the situation after retirement at old age? And what about the situation of the female labor force, as women are often exposed to such discontinuities in their working lives, but also other disadvantages, such as the gender pay gap? Agnieszka, would you like to start?
I think it's a topic for another seminar, which is a week long almost. Well, first and foremost, with the more and more scarce workforce in Europe, which is again a consequence of population aging, changing, and low number of births that we observe in many of the countries already for some decades, it is very important to reduce the risks of such vulnerable life courses and to react to such vulnerable life courses. Second, in many countries with the labor market development, that includes also Poland, we have very low rate of unemployment, but indeed when we look at people who are unemployed, they are very frequently those that have longer spells of unemployment. They have this kind of vulnerable life courses. Helping them out when they are already deeply in their status is very difficult. It is of course possible, but that requires again a very wise policies that combine not only, let's say, pure training of the skills, but also very frequently psychological support, health support. Those people usually have poor health as well, because longer unemployment also affects not only mental health, but sometimes also physical health with reduced ability to access to healthcare systems. So indeed, we have looked at some programs implemented in Poland in the past, and we saw that those most successful really combine this psychological support, health support. In case of women, if we speak about women, also support in getting the hair done, the makeup done, appropriate clothing when you go to the interview for a job. So things that seem to be relatively simple, but it turned out that they were life changers for such people. So combined policies to those most vulnerable. And again, I would stress out the need to identify risks early. So when we look at the school to work transitions, we can already see people who are at risk of being those vulnerable, which gives them a scar for the rest of their working lives and adult lives. So it is very important to identify such people early and react early. And this also refers to women who very frequently withdraw from the labor market, especially during the maternity period. So policies that help to reconcile work and family lives are also important, but also policies that try to support women in remaining economically active if they want, if they can, because withdrawal from the labor market means that their skills and competencies become less adequate to the current labor market needs once they try to rejoin the labor market later on. So it is very, again, important to think about policies that help women to reconcile work and family, policies that do not push out women from the labor market. Again, I can look at the Polish example with our new family support, including unconditional child benefit. We do see a problem of women who withdraw from the labor market, who decide not to follow educational paths as their slightly older peers. So that means that it is very important to try to see policies in a wider context and avoid this kind of risks of vulnerabilities.
No, thanks a lot. Mr. State Secretary, would you like to add something? And please take the floor.
Yes, first I would like to add that I agree with Agnieszka. First of all, concerning your remark, minimum income is only one element. It's one piece. It has to be considered in an integrated way, as you did. And So dealing with the problem of vulnerable groups and difficult work the conditions, first support is consultancy. We have to give good consultancy. Actually, for specific vulnerable groups, we do this also with the use of European money, particularly for like groups like homeless people or Roma who are living in Germany. There we have very dedicated approaches of consultancy to get to them, to reach out to them, and then to empower them, to give them more strength to define and to their way of life and to find an integrated life. Then support of qualification. I don't repeat what I've said earlier. Then the big point of health support, which was mentioned by Agnieszka. And here I would like to add that in Germany we have a quite good tradition of rehabilitation policy. So people suffering from chronic illness and being unable to work can receive invalidity pension. Actually, this was the basic pension scheme of Bismarck, which he introduced in 1889. It was not an old age pension scheme. It was only an invalidity pension scheme. And only when you were older as 70 in 1889, by law, you were considered to be invalid, and then you got this pension. So we started with this. But the way to this invalidity pension goes through rehabilitation, which has a priority over pension. And the goal of rehabilitation is a partial or complete reintegration into working life with medical rehabilitation as well as with job training, which is combined and financed actually in Germany also then by the pension scheme to avoid to pay invalidity pension. But we have realized that we have more and more people applying for invalidity pension due to psychological problems. And here our system of rehabilitation is not working very well. They spend a lot of money, they give a lot of support, but at the end people don't find the way back to work. And that's why we have started a huge program, innovative ways to participate in working life, Rehab-Ho, where we are funding projects of job centers and pension insurance providers to maintain or restore people's ability to work better than before. We have made 2 rounds. In the first round, 55 models with a budget of 290 million euros. And the second round, which starts this year, it's 49 models all over the country with a volume of 270 million. That's really a lot of money to find new ways how to support the people who are part of those vulnerable groups due to chronological diseases, in particular addiction, so it's a topic, alcohol addiction, and psychological problems.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really a lot of groups which we really have to take care in very specific means and measures and cannot put them all into one basket, particularly if you also say people are really on a very bad track in their lives, and we have really to take them away from that life course track as soon as we can, as early as we can. Perhaps you think also a little bit on the situation of people after the retirement age. In one of our Population Europe's collaborations with the Council of the Baltic Sea States, we wrote an overview of the different policy measures concerning the transition to retirement in the states surrounding the Baltic Sea. And besides incentives to work longer and disincentives to retire earlier, we might have to provide more support for active career paths at old age. For example, atypical employment, part-time work, self-employment, contractual work such as senior advisor, paid social work and the like. How can we better support people in this transition period to retirement to ensure that the social participation, Teilhabe, of vulnerable population groups in old age? Mr. State Secretary, perhaps I may start with you.
Actually, I think by informing them about what is possible already now. We have already a quite flexible system. You can take early retirement in Germany with the age of 63, while the normal pension age is now 65 and 9 months, and will be soon for those born after 1963, 67. And if you go earlier, you will have a deduction of your pension, but it depends on individual conditions, then maybe the deduction is not as high. And always you can work while you receive your pension. And actually for each year which you work more, you get an increase of the pension by 6%. It's like a game with your life. Yeah? If you think, oh, I'm very healthy, I will have a long life, I will get 100. So let's work 2 years more. That gives 12% up. That's a really big business case. But it's a little bit, it's a speculation actually on your individual life expectancy. And this is already possible now. And even before, there are certain possibilities to add on while you receive the pension that you can work. And just for the period of the pandemic, actually, we have made these rules quite large. So you can earn up to 40,000 euros a year without any deduction of your pension, what is quite a lot in Germany at least. For average income is less. If we see no bad effects on the labor market due to this openness, I think Parliament will decide next year even to have this rule permanently, not only during the pandemic. During the pandemic, it was particularly also made because we wanted that people who are working in old age care, in hospitals, doctors, that they have a high incentive after pension to work. That was the basic, very open motive, but I think it works good. And so we have a flexible system. So most what we have to do is to promote it more, and maybe even to improve it, to make it even a little bit more flexible. But basically it's there. And as far as I know, in all European member states, you have more or less the same. There is not a clear cut. And actually the most rigid point is not the pension system, but are the contracts between the unions and the employers' organizations. There, they use the pension age as a very important parameter in their contracts. And this maybe has to be changed. It's not the pension age, but the contracts which are not flexible. Because here, actually, very often, for reasons of development of HR, human resources, they want to get rid of the old people. That's the point. They don't talk about it, but that's the case. So they ask openly in the debate for long age schemes, the pension scheme, simultaneously they throw them out.
Right. It's still, I mean, it's also research discusses since ages, actually, we should be more flexible in that regard in this retirement. But there's still a lot of ageism that people then have really to leave when they cross 50 are already considered sometimes as old and should go. Agnieszka, please, if you would like to add something.
Yes, I think it is very important to, first prepare a little bit people to the retirement process. And I think, again, given the, let's say, age management, age structure changes, older people can serve as mentors, not only through the end of their working careers, but also during the beginning of their pension lives to younger workers, so that they could share their experience, they could share their, say, life knowledge accumulated throughout the entire life on how to deal with certain situations, and this is something that young people usually don't have. So I think this kind of policies that support engagement of people who may be retired, but they still have their knowledge, their competences that they can share with the younger peers is absolutely important. The other thing that I believe is crucial is to think about the activity of older people, not only in terms of the labor market, but also social involvement. And and this is particularly important for the local policies, how to involve older people in the social activities at the local level, maybe also in relation with children and the youth. There are very interesting initiatives of combining, for example, foster homes for children with care provided by people at the long-term care facilities, which turn out to be very beneficial to both sides. So this is, of course, a very extreme example, but I think that well, showing people that at a local level there is a lot to be done with the social activity, so that people are not closed in their four walls, especially again after the pandemic period when many people were afraid of living outside, and they really reduced their social networks very much. It is very important to rebuild those networks, to build those networks, to keep people socially active, to provide various forms of contacts there. We have in Poland the so-called third age universities that are extremely growing and an extremely interesting initiative. And when we ask people why they participate, it's not only because they learn new skills, new languages, they can participate in various forms of classes and lectures, but also they have a contact with other people. And for them, it is very important to have this kind of active involvement. So I think it is also important not to look at the social activities and to support people in remaining active socially after retirement.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. We had this year at the Berlin Demography Forum also a lot of discussions on that point, how important that the human resource of old age people and retired people for the NGOs, for the civil sector is indeed on the local scale, and that this is some potential we should really use also in that regard to give people a worthwhile life and a dignified life. Really very broad now, a bunch of flowers and ideas for what we can do and what we already do in terms of the issues we've raised, so vulnerability, taking care for vulnerable people, for people in the transition periods, people who have broken life courses and the more. Now, let me invite our experts from the panel to discuss the questions with you. So who would like to take the floor? Please raise your hand. Ms. Razum, Tatiana, please take the floor.
Jane raised her hand as well, but I used my digital competencies, yes, and used this hand on the screen. Thanks a lot for invitation, and it was a very, very interesting discussion. What I would like to add, first about retraining programs and programs for just changing skills or acquiring new skills or improving qualification. And I would like to link it with vulnerable groups and women. So all three questions in one. We have in Russia the special program for retraining of women after their maternity leave, when they would like to re-enter labor market. But as now, owing to some programs of social support, many women prefer to have 2 children or 3 children. And so these interruption of their labor activities are rather long. So they forget a lot about their previous profession, and many of them would like to change profession completely. So, of course, it was a rather expensive program to find out all these women, to check what would they like to learn, to know, how to adjust them to labor market, but still it works. Special programs for young women returning after maternity leave. The second idea was about preventing vulnerability. 50. I would like to add a few words about youngsters, particularly teenagers. I think that it is a very, very acute problem to prevent youngsters to enter so-called NEET group, non-education, employment and training. So professional orientation and involvement in social activities, schooling, then just assistance to overcome those thresholds while they are finishing schooling, and then what? Either they are looking for some job of their dream, or they have particular concrete advice how to enter labor market according to their knowledge and skills, how to get professional training. I think it's very, very important to pay attention to teenagers, and it will help us to create this link between generations, and maybe those people who are aging, they can help in this professional orientation. Of course, we know that there are lots of changes now, and sometimes the experience that is a little bit argument towards the idea that old people can share their experience. Sometimes youngsters do not need our experience. They would like to have their own. And sometimes our knowledge is not so valuable for them because they would like to have their own life and they're extremely independent. But still we try to prove something we know it can be valuable for them. So maybe it will be enough for the first. For my first.
Just your last point is really important to see. And we had a couple of weeks ago a board meeting where our former Minister of Labor, Franz Müntefering, was with us, and he made very strongly that point that the old age people have their own experience and their own knowledge, which they can hand over to younger generations. But they are also sometimes helpless, let's say, in the digital world in particular. And it's exactly the other way around. And so there should really be a kind of intergenerational transfer and exchange. Herr Staatssekretär Agnieszka, if you also want to answer to questions, please raise also your hand. The next one in the row is actually changed. She actually waved her hand physically. Jane, please take the floor.
Andreas, digital competencies, I think I need some training. First of all, I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to here today and to continue my voyage with Population Europe. I was just reflecting that Population Europe has been working for, gosh, 13 years now. And I think one of our very first activities together was actually talking about aging and policies. So I think it's something that's not going to go away. But I was really to see the green paper on aging from the Commission, and the subtitle is Fostering Solidarity and Responsibility Between Generations. And it's something that we've just started to pick up on, is this difference between generations. But I think going forward, we will need to pay some attention to intergenerational fairness and how some of the policies that we introduce, what is the impact that these policies are having on different generations. I had the honor of being the special advisor to a House of Lords Select Committee on Intergenerational Fairness and Provision, which was published in April 2019. So whilst we were still a member of the union. And there we really struggled to think about what are the definitions of intergenerational fairness. And we came up with a definition that it's the idea that each cohort, I'm reading out from the report now, each cohort should retain a fair expectation of social improvement and have a fulfilling life without being unduly harmed by the actions of a previous or a subsequent cohort. And I think this was a really nice definition because it didn't tie us down too hard. But then we started to look at data on how different generations were faring. And we found that actually it's very little data. And when we introduce policies, we don't think about the policy impacts across different generations. We don't take that life course perspective that you flagged up as being so important, Andres, that that's what we need to do, is to actually, when we're looking at policies, we need to take that life course perspective. And it relates to Agnieszka's point about the new maternity policy in Poland. Fantastic that there are no conditions around the benefits for children, but yet if it's then encouraging women to leave the labour market, that's going to have a longer term implication further down the life course. I agreed with so much that everybody has said, but one thing I particularly liked was when Rolf was talking about the game that people play with whether they retire now or keep working. And one of the things I think we need in order to play that game is more financial literacy. Because that's one of the reasons people don't play that game, is they don't understand the implications. And actually we need to introduce financial literacy in schools right at the beginning, but across all cohorts. So it's not just people in their 60s who need to understand pensions, but it's people in their 40s and their 30s and their 20s. I think I'll probably stop there, but lots and lots to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Jane. It was a really important point, particularly also the literacy point, because I think this is really something we have really cannot work. It has to be very early to bring people to that idea that whatever they do will affect their later life very strongly, and they should really care. The next one is Hervé. Please take the floor, Hervé.
Okay, thank you very much as well for the invitation, and congratulations to Population Europe for the great work, really. So I'm tempted to discuss on many issues, of course, but I will limit myself to two. First, very briefly, to really bring strong support to what Agnieszka said about the importance of early interventions. So life course is very important, and and it's important because all the, say, difficulties that people can experience compound through the life course, from school, labor market, health, and so forth, and then pensions, of course. So that's one reason. The second reason, of course, is that they interact between each other. So one difficulty in one area generates another difficulty in the other area, and this compound the problem. So early intervention means, as Agnieszka said, for example, even at school, a country I know well is France, not too bad with the education system, but when you look at the spending of the system by pupil, we know that it's very important to put a lot on disadvantaged kids from disadvantaged backgrounds and at early ages. And in France, we spend most in secondary school, for example. That's one example where there is inefficiency, and France, I don't blame France at all. It's just one example among many. So yes, this is very important. Early as well, intervening early between the school to work transition, to intervene as early as people lose their job to provide active support. In the health area, it applies to health prevention that we think has the probably biggest return, in fact. So this is very important. And what is important, it's not only for individual trajectory that it is important, but even for the return for society. And there are tons of work in the US, Ekman, around even the impact on delinquency, for example, right? So this is important for the society on top of individual trajectory. So that's very important. My second point is about the transition from work to retirement. And yes, Rolf mentioned the financial incentives. They are not necessarily extremely good in all countries, but yes, bonus penalty schemes exist in many. And I agree as well, of course, that the financial literacy is important, so both things. But what we know is today, there is a two binary decision to work or retire. And we try to think about these gradual or phased retirement issues, and it's not an easy topic. Our analysis showed that, our position at the OECD is that clearly we should separate the decision to work from the decision to retire. But then when we talk about gradual retirement, which is something very important, sometimes we think the topic is confused with the idea of that this is a way to increase labor supply, say, increase the total number of hours worked. And we don't think this is the right approach. People can indeed work longer part-time, but some people might retire early and work part-time. So impact on total hours worked, this is not the issue. The issue in some way is almost most important. It's the well-being of people. People would like to gradually retire. We have that. It does not happen in reality. And the question is, of course, what are the main obstacles? And here to quickly, one obstacle is the mechanics. First, the mechanics of around pension calculation is something very important. So this issue is even one more reason to have simple pension rules for the people, what people can understand, and for the management of the system. The simple rules to say, well, if you decide to work 20%, 40%, 60%, this is what will be your impact. And that's something very important. And of course, the other point is from the employer's perspective, the possibility to work part-time might generate sometimes cost. And this is something not easy politically to address. And so we need to bring stakeholders. The good news, of course, is that with the development of IT and with the, we think, post-COVID world, what we learned through COVID is that maybe there will be some flexibility brought into the picture, which will enhance this idea of part-time work at older ages. And I stop for now. Thank you.
Yes, Staatssekretär, I think you raised the hands. It looked a bit like that. Would you like to say something?
Yes, if I may. I would like to make two remarks. One, that I would like to share some interesting figures with you about this transition, because a colleague was speaking about this, Hervé was speaking about this binary decision. And I agree very much that it has to do a lot with what is going on in the companies and how they are organizing their work, and whether they're really eager to have people working part-time and so on. But we have figures about the number of people who are working after having reached pension age, and we make a survey, big survey, which is very reliable, Alterssicherungsbericht for those who like to speak German. And the last one was made in 2019. And according to these figures, we have of all people above 65, so this goes up to 100 plus, 8% are working, that is 1.4 million. And what I find is very interesting, a quarter of them are self-employed. We have a very high tendency even to restart something, to do a new business. The average percentage of self-employed in Germany is 10%. It's very different in different European countries. In Greece, it's 30%. In Germany, it's 10. So this 25 is really a lot. So it's not that they continue to be self-employed, they started. And then we have asked people for their motivation. And the most mentioned motivation was, I like to work, 27%. 24% said, I need the money. So the need for the money is also a motivation, but it's actually only on the second place. Third place, to have a task, to be part of 22%. And just also very good reason to have contact with other people, 19%. So I really wanted to make this point so that there is some activities and that there are even a change of the activities. It's not to continue with the old thing, maybe. And the second remark I wanted to make is reflecting on what Lea was saying, and I'm very happy with the activities by the European Commission, pillars, and now the summit. And we will discuss this next Monday on the next EBSCO in Luxembourg. And I want really to emphasize this point that a strong social Europe is a strong Europe of strong social welfare states. Really, social policy in Europe is very subtle, because it's not the union, which is the social state, but the members. But adding to what Lea was saying, I think the union, the European Commission can do quite a lot. It's not only support by advice. I think it's very important to have this support by common understanding, which I mentioned before, a common understanding what it means to be a welfare state, and then to push the gang of member states by the aspect of minimum standards. I think that is a very nice way. Also observing, monitoring, setting minimum standards, and so push the gang forward. And this is done in several fields. It is quite efficient. And I can really share with you that for the national debates in Germany, it always plays an important role in parliament, that members of parliament are quoting papers from the European Union, etc. So it's really pushing us very well.
Thanks a lot. We have another two questions and comments from the floor. The first one is Alexia von Ganz-Böskowitz and then Marc Bovenschulte.
Yeah, so thanks as well for inviting me to this excellent and extremely interesting discussion. And I will try to be very brief. I just wanted to make 3 points, I think, which I see also extremely important. I agree with everything what has been discussed so far. So my first point is, I think, something which I have the feeling we should also be obvious about. I think it's this intergenerational transmission we still observe in educational opportunities. I mean, I can just tell you from Austria, it's still extremely huge. And I think this is a problem for the future. And I mean, we are working, of course, our educational system is discussed every year. We are trying new attempts, but I think it's a general phenomenon, I think, in Europe, this intergenerational transmission of opportunities, which will imply intergenerational transmission of vulnerability. I think this is a point I would want to make. And I think I fully agree with Jane, and I had exactly the same comment. I think this financial illiteracy is again also very different across different groups in our society. And I was amazed. I mean, there is a lot of research, and we are really almost on the same level as some developing countries when we talk about financial illiteracy. I mean, and this is really something I think which has to be worked against it. My second point I would like to make, and this refers to my own research, we are doing this national transfer account analysis where we try to understand, I mean, bringing age into the kind of national accounts and try to understand age redistribution. And we are talking a lot about monetary transfers today, about benefits, but what we also focus in our work is time use, so non-monetary transfers. And I think this is something, and we have Stieglitz and others, of course, behind this, who really argue this is something we have to bring into our national accounts and to value. Because to be honest, for our society, and we know this, I mean, it's one of the biggest, or not biggest, but it's a huge contribution to our society, and it's heavily gender biased, I should also say. It's when we look at the data, it's basically the females also providing a lot of these time transfers to the young children, but also to the elderly. And that's also something when we have to work on our welfare state reforms, we cannot keep this out. I think it's not a free lunch. I mean, to bring females into the labor force, I'm definitely, I think, on this side, but we are also then losing a lot of the other kind of support, which I think was the best example now during COVID, where we see exactly how vulnerable we are still. I think we have brought females into the labor market, but we have not offered enough possibilities to take care of all what they have done before. And we have termed something which is called the rush hour of life. It's between age 30 and 40, 45. And where you have really a lot of tasks. I mean, not only being in the kind of labor market, but having a family, having to care for others, etc. So that's a second point. And now I would like to make a third point, which is also coming from my own research. We have a huge social gradient in many demographic parameters, especially also in mortality. And I'm bringing this point because I think it's when we talk about social security reforms, we cannot ignore this. There are huge and a lot of studies now also in Germany where we can show that in fact many systems become regressive. I mean, the opposite if you don't take this social gradient of mortality into account. And my point is, and I think there are a lot of economists, already studying this. When we talk about reforms, we have to consider how these reforms affect different groups in our society. And there are even studies increasing the retirement age, and I'm behind all of you. I think that's something we have to do, is in fact hurting these kind of vulnerabilities even more if we don't take this social gradient into account. And there are already, I think, some other reform options on the table, how we can take care of this. So this is a very important point. And in fact, my last, I have a fourth point. We should not only talk about economic values, we should more generally talk about well-being. The same euro of transfers means something different for a family versus for a single household, for example. And this is again what we are also trying to bring into our research to really understand the well-being of a transfer. And this is not so easy to judge, to be honest, but it's important because we have to really accept we are becoming more heterogeneous in our society. And this is extremely important. And this is also what we try to bring into our research. So many thanks.
Thank you, Alexa. It's really an exciting research you do, and I can only invite the audience to see on your website and to learn more about these national transfer accounts and how we can balance out over the life course intergenerational transfers in a fair way, and also in a society fair way. Marc, you raised the hand.
Yes, so I would like to make some points, taking up the inputs from some of the speakers here, and I have to admit it's still thought in progress. I would like to start with Jane mentioning the financial literacy. I'm totally right with this, but it has to be more than just something like a theoretical practice. So you have to make decisions on this, and this leads me over to Agnieszka when you mentioned the gender pay gap. I think this, financial literacy can be as well developed as it is, or even better, and you can't change this because it's out of your possibilities. So we talk here about something like structural inequalities. And I think it's quite a big leverage effect to overcome these structural inequalities. We mentioned Germany has something now formulated by the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, basic work. This is quite equivalent to the low wage sector, but it's not the same. It includes something like system relevant jobs, but it's not the same. It's normally not knowledge based. And normally you don't need something like a vocational training to carry out these jobs. And so broad range of jobs, it goes from riders, from delivery services, from simple industrial work, and leads over to courier and express services and so on and so on. And this makes in Germany about 20% of all working people. So it's not something like a marginal group. And they suffer from, I have to admit, structural inequality because they are not included in all these schemes for career advancement. They don't have something like an industrial citizenship because they are not integrated in the wage schemes, and they have something like these going up mechanisms. So if they are limited to the salary, which is given by the low wage limits, they can't fully participate in filling up the pension. Is always something like a vulnerable situation in general. They are very threatened by poverty and age, and this can't be. So we have to change this system to make all these perfectly explained systems for life course oriented development accessible to them as well, because if not, we leave 20% of our working society out of this process.
I think it's a very important point you made. Very often we think about our own lives and our own situations, and then we reflect sometimes not that people may start under completely different settings, and this can really create inequality. So it's a very important point. Thanks a lot for these interventions by the experts. Now we have two questions from the floor, which I would like to bring forward, and then I would like to ask our experts or the State Secretary Agnieszka to answer to that. The first one comes from Giacomo P. How much the next generation EU enters the picture of welfare states, present and future public financial sustainability? I'm thinking in particular to the Italian case. how much this EU plan will condition the public expenditure choices exclusively to profitable account voices instead of social cohesion ones. So who would like to answer to that question?
Actually, I have to say that for the moment, I don't have a complete overview about the proposals by the member states, but there might be a tendency towards investment because Next Generation EU is linked also to Green Europe and to the whole idea of supporting the change of our society relative to climate change and digitalization. So at least for the German fund, I can say that this has a tendency to use this money for building up our society in these fields. But for the German case, I can also add that actually we have consciously decided that we don't use the money from Next Generation EU to refund German social security system. So we have a quite developed social security system, 2/3 based on social contributions, 1/3 based on taxes, which is there, which might have to be improved. That is another question. But we don't want to use now the money from EU Next Generation, with which we want to build up the future of Europe, to refinance simply German schemes. So in a way, I think there is this tendency, but there might be also good reasons for this tendency. But I can say actually only for the German case, because that's the only one I know. So now one has really to look at all those programs to see. I know a little bit the Greek one. We had some exchange with the Greek government. They have a stronger social component in their program than Germany. This at least I can say.
Any other colleagues who would like to answer to that question? Otherwise, I would go to the next one. Agnieszka, do you want to say something on that?
Well, I wanted to say that, I mean, it is very important to maintain this intergenerational solidarity, define it well in the future context. As Alexia mentioned, the research on the national transfer accounts shows that a lot of welfare transfers are actually age determined rather than income level determined. So this is very important to sort of maintain this kind of system that allows to keep this intergenerational solidarity, but it also means that the young people need to trust welfare systems, and so that they can contribute to their maintenance and development in a sustainable manner. So I think this is very important to clearly communicate, and this is also related to financial literacy, to clearly communicate the goals of the social protection systems, particularly social insurance, and why it is important to maintain social insurance systems in the context of our societies and populations.
Thank you. There's another important question from the floor from Ulrike Spohn. The expert mentioned the importance of social context networks in older age. How do you see the future role of family? Is it changing? Will friends, neighbors, and so on become more important for social inclusion and health, psychological well-being? And what could be done to compensate reduced potential of family regarding social contexts and networks? Sorry. Who would like to answer directly on that? Jane, please.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you. A really, really important question, especially since we're seeing the changes in family patterns, and one of the trends, probably starting with the 1960s baby boomers, is actually increasing the number of people who are not having any children. And so this will have an impact when they move into old age, because we know from our current research that the key carers in later life are family members, starting with the partner and then adult children. And we're also seeing trends towards increasing separation in later life amongst people, particularly in their 60s and 70s, people starting to divorce and repartner. So I think we will need to have a rethink around whether we can rely on family as the main source of care going forward. There has already been some research on the role friends and neighbours play in social networks, and they play an enormous role in social networks. But when it comes down to the crunch in later life, when you move from having social networks where they're leisure related to actually personal care tasks, we find that actually it's still the family that is the key provider of personal care tasks. So this is the area where I think we are going to have to perhaps rethink what we do and how we maybe even at the moment, friends do not qualify very often for carers benefits if carers benefits are in place. Equally, neighbours do not qualify for systems of support. So we might need to have a rethink of policies.
Znaczy,
So
ja
really
rozumiem,
good
że
question.
takie ogólne sformułowanie tego pytania byłoby, czy jeżeli mamy pieniądze, które jakby są warunkowane.
Seems the channel's open.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry. Tatiana, please.
Thanks a lot. I would like to add a few words, but quite close to what was said by Jane, that people need diverse types of support. Of course, family, children, grandchildren mean a lot for social comfort of each person. But we have to think about individual interests, and we should support the development of social community involvement in each person's life in order to keep his or her own life. And lots of people prefer to have private interests that are supported by friends close by age, and it means a lot in their life. On the other hand, we rely on middle-age population to be involved in labor activities. And that is quite close to what Alexa told us about this double or even triple burden on females who have to take care about children, about parents-in-law, and at the same time work. So social community, of course, will play a great role. And again, about diversity, sooner or later, we need special social support and medical support to older people, to those who are suffering from diseases special for aging people. And in that case, both governments and social communities, and by the way, maybe even corporations, should think about these ways of supporting people in this situation. So I think that this multi-channel involvement will be needed in coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Herr Staatssekretär?
I think this is a very, very important question, because actually our society and our economy bases on families. Basically, families are the core for humanity to get actually new workers. So it's a positive external effect from families for the economy. But on the other hand, and I was very impressed by the work by Richard Sennett, which was written about 20 years ago. It's the corrosion of character, the personal consequences of work in the new capitalism, or in German, it's The Flexible Man. This book very clearly elaborates about the point that capitalism and market economy forces people to be more single, to be flexible, to go, to be mobile, to get, it's, if they have a family, this might disturb their work. So on the one hand, market economy needs families, otherwise they will run out of labor. On the other hand, they create a big force against families. And this is really a subtle point. And it's now social policy comes into the picture, because it allows, if you have a pension scheme organized by the government, you don't need family for old age income. So this is another tendency which maybe is a force against family. But on the other hand, I observe someone who's living as a single, he's weaker on the labor market. He's dependent on his work and income. A family can also be a point of, once again, it's a game theoretical approach. If you have a family, then you can be stronger on the labor market because you might have an alternative. If you are single, there is no alternative. You have to go to the labor market. So in this sense, I think we should strengthen families and, as said in the question, also strengthening networks, which might also help people to be also strong on the labor market, to have alternatives, to have financial literacy. Actually, I think it could be very interesting for the point of financial literacy to create more networks of people who are interested in this, to learn how to act on the financial markets. So I think we need both. We have a tendency that families shrink. And this tendency is not a good tendency, I'm very convinced of. And simultaneously, we have to observe that it happens. So we have also to support in other ways and to organize ourselves to support in our ways. And this has to do with an inclusive society, which is open for networks and people come together.
Thanks a lot. It's really an important point. Just to mention that we are about, with some Berlin institutions, research institutions, about to form a new center on population diversity. And one strong focus will be on family diversity, because indeed the family is really a nucleus where we really can handle all health issues, unemployment issues, labor, wealth, everything runs to a large extent through families. So you have really to understand how families change is so an important point which was made in the question. Actually, I should now wrap up the seminar, which will be quite hard because it's so rich what we discussed in so many aspects. I would move that a bit into a written publication, which we will publish shortly after the seminar, so that we try to compile this again into some paper which can be distributed. But I will not end without leaving Agnieszka a final word because she raised her hand. Please, Agnieszka.
Thank you. I wanted to very clearly, to shortly remark on the family. It is extremely important. Again, our COVID share review showed that in the crisis times, the social relations of older people really focus on nuclear families. So families are extremely important, and social networks, wider social networks are important, but this is the basis on the family contacts, which are absolutely crucial. So I think that is a bone of our societies, and definitely it will stay like that.
Yeah, thank you, Agnieszka, for this really important remark also on the role of nuclear families. It was really a very rich discussion, so I can only say a loud and clear thank you to all of you, to State Secretary and to Agnieszka, to the experts who joined us today, to the people from the floor who raised very important questions. So we learned a lot about what you have to do in early life, over the life course, how we can increase literacy. I would also add the technical literacy, perhaps, how we can create more flexible structures at this transition into retirement and overlaps, and that people then can gradually go to retirement. We discussed about the role of the welfare state versus private actors versus the economy in that process, and went even down to the time use of people, that we really should go into details to understand these important periods of life. So thank you so much for all your contributions. It was really a very inspiring and rich discussion. As mentioned, we will write a short paper on that and let it circulate amongst you so that you can see also the output of this. And of course, it was not intended to find a final word on these all. This is highly complex. As Jane mentioned, we discussed, since we exist actually already, about these issues, and we will certainly do that also in the future, in cooperation with our collaboration partners like the Council of the Baltic Sea States, the partners from Population Europe, and of course, from the stakeholders from the policy sector, NGOs and other groups. So thank you so much for joining us at our event, and I wish you now really a nice weekend, and thanks a lot for being with us. Take care and stay healthy. Bye-bye.